So I want to preface this discussion post by saying that this is my third attempt now to record this. And the first two didn't take with captions because I wasn't speaking very loud. And that's because I'm currently suffering the effects of COVID. So I'm going to try to get through this, make it at least 5 minutes, but it may be a little short just because I'm not feeling particularly well tonight. So I want to focus on one particular concept from the book, which was market pressure, and talk about how the different news outlets kind of center their stories, especially when it's related to politics around this. So the concept of market pressure talks about what viewers want to see. In the book on pages, I believe 68 and 69, talk about how PBS, which is an unbiased news reporting station, gets far less views than something like Entertainment Tonight, which has more celebrity, more pomp and circumstance, and in some cases, more controversy. And so I think when you talk about politics, when stations and even newspapers, even though the days of actually reading a newspaper is long gone, stations like MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, those types of stations, they get more viewership, they get more popularity out of trying to make things as controversial or as outlandish or brash as they can, especially when it comes to political figures. As someone who's probably a little bit older than most of the class, I spend a great deal of time watching news. I watch the local news almost every day, and I watch things like MSNBC and CNN for national news coverage, especially during times of elections and important events, such as the speech that the president gave the other night. So I want to start by looking first at these two speeches that Dr. Hendricks asked us to look at. And one of the biggest things that I saw is that while both current President Biden and former President Trump focused on America, so to speak, President Biden used a lot of we's and us's and how we're going to address things, and alluded to, even though not everyone voted for me, I'm going to be a president for everyone if I win, and things like that. And he talked about some of the current problems that were going on at that time, such as COVID and some of the other issues that we were dealing with, and how he wanted to solve these issues together. Former President Trump, on the other hand, while he did say some of those same things and talked about COVID, he talked about the border crisis, he talked about several different things. I noticed two big things. One was there was a lot of repetition from things he had said in 2016, things that he was going to do that had not been done yet, border walls and different pieces of legislation and things like that. But he also started his speech off very much about himself and his family, introducing his whole family, a lot of I've done this, I've done that, I will continue to do this and that. And while he did say a lot of it was for America and for the people, I felt like his speech was more centered on himself. And I just realized I'm probably looking all over the place, so I'm sorry if that's distracting. So in terms of the speeches themselves, I think those are the two big differences. I felt like one was more centered on self and one was more centered on the American public. And that may be some of my bias coming into it as well. But that's just kind of what I noticed right off the bat, especially in time frames. President Biden's speech was about 25 minutes, and it was very concise and to the point about the things that if he wins the presidency, what he will do. President Trump's speech was, I want to say, almost 3 times that long, maybe even longer. But part of that is he was talking about some of the things he's had done and some of the things he's been saying since he was president for 4 years, and then continuing on into what he wanted to do. So now we shift a little bit and talk about news coverage. So it's no secret that there are several major outlets that cover each side, Democrat versus Republican, MSNBC, CNN, and then you have Fox News on one hand. And I think it's important. I don't even know if important is the word, but it's very obvious to me when you watch these news stations that there are a lot of things that go on, and it's interesting to watch the approaches. So for example, I couldn't find a lot of clips of actual news stations talking about these two videos back, a couple of years ago. But I did find different videos of just different ways they address both President Trump and President Biden. MSNBC, CNN, those types of things were always very favorable to President Biden. And they did often point out the negatives of President Trump, and I would say very often. But in my opinion, it was the tone of it was not as much um, until later on in the presidency, accusatory, defamatory, or anything like that. But if you watch Fox News, and especially people like Sean Hannity, everything he says is, when he talks about President Biden speaking, he's like, oh, look at him. He sounds like he's old, or he sounds like he's not sure what he's talking about. He's having to be spoon fed. That's pre recorded. Well, that was one of the big things that his speech was pre recorded and not live. And turned out that that wasn't true. Um, Whereas what the newspapers did, Washington Post, New York Times, they did a lot of fact checking, they for both speeches. But I felt like, and even in those cases, um, some of them made it a very big point to show all the things that President Trump had said that were actually not true or skirted with the truth. And so they made it a point to say, here are all the falsehoods, here are all the fact checks that we did that showed that President Trump is not necessarily being 100% truthful. Some of those were more supportive of Joe Biden. But I think overall, the approach on both sides of this was that, if I'm a news station that supports the Democratic side, I'm anti-Trump, but more so pro-Biden. And if I'm on the other side, such as Fox News, I'm very pro-Trump, but I'm also very anti-Biden and try to point out all the different things. And I know that sounds like sure that's true of everything, but what really struck me as odd, and I thought it was just great timing of coincidence, is President Biden gave a speech the other night, and it wasn't unusual for presidents to give speeches. Obviously, we have State of the Union, we have other national addresses that presidents make, but it's just one of those things where he said something that has ruffled a lot of feathers on some sides and obviously gained a lot of support on the others, saying that this group of ultra Trump supporters were tearing down democracy and things like that. And the irony of that situation was you have MSNBC, for example, who talked about the speech and said he pointed out the things that are going on right now with certain politicians, certain fan base or support from the regular people like us that vote. And all he did was point out how these things are bad for the country. But MSNBC, I'm sorry, Hannity, I believe it was, said, he's inciting, he's doing, this is no different than the Capitol riot speech that the President Trump gave. This is dividing our country even worse. He's making things worse. This is going to cause more problems down the road. And where I thought that was ironic was, and again, I preface by saying, maybe this is my bias, is there were times when President Trump made statements like that. And I'm not even talking about the Capitol riots, but he would make statements that many people viewed as divisive. But on one side of it, it was not, on the Hannity side, on the Fox News side, they didn't see an issue with those things as they were seeing that with President Biden's speech from the other night. And so I just thought it's very interesting to see when two things are done, and maybe they're similar in the way they were presented, how both of those sides take very different approaches depending on who's the person saying it. I felt like I could say this and be, unbiased, that if that same speech had come from President Trump saying that about the, far right, the far left socialist group that, that's been identified, that same news station wouldn't have had any problem with him saying that. And then you would have heard a lot more uproar from the MSNBCs of the world. So it's just very interesting to see how that's driven by pressure, because honestly, the viewership that they have, in my opinion, is driven by the fact that people like to see these kinds of controversial things, this kind of bickering back and forth and the way it's presented, especially if it's pro my side or anti the other side, those types of things. And so I think that's very interesting. I think one of the things, the last thing before I talk about fairness, one statement that I did see, and again, this shows bias on maybe the MSNBC, CNN side, is I often hear that anything that President Biden does when he speaks is very presidential. and it's always compared to the last guy, it's very presidential. And so, not to say that only one side of this is biased in any way, because I think that the side that supports the Democratic beliefs and the Democratic politicians also have their biases against the Republicans and former President Trump as well. And so, again, you see that, and it's very evident to someone like me who watches these shows on a regular, almost nightly basis. So, one of the last questions in the prompt was, "Fair? Is this fair?" And I think that the simple answer to this question is yes. And the reason why I think it's fair is because there's no state sponsored, only one station that drives all of the media. And so if you don't like what MSNBC says, then turn to Fox News and you'll more than likely hear it the way you want to hear it. If you don't like what Fox News says, then turn it to MSNBC. The fact that there's open competition, a free market when it comes to media allows for both sides to present their side in the way that they want it presented, whether it's 100% accurate, whether it's skewed towards one side's beliefs or the other side's beliefs. And honestly, even if it's 100% inaccurate, as long as it's not defamatory, in violation of any kind of freedom of speech tenet of the Constitution, I don't see a problem with a fairness issue because all sides have the ability to present their position on their specific station, as opposed to if we were in, let's say, a communist or another type of government where the government ran the only news outlets and only the government controlled what went out to the public. And then I think then we would have to talk more about that being unfair. So that's my position on this topic. I don't know where I'm at in terms of time. Hopefully next time you see a video from me, I'll be feeling a lot better. So feel free to drop your comments. I'll be glad to have some conversations and discussion about this. Thank you.